She told me to use the side entrance on my first day. Not because there was a rule about it, because she looked at me and decided I was the kind of man who should enter through the side entrance. I was wearing my uniform, dark gray, the name of the security company stitched above the left pocket in yellow thread that had faded to the color of old mustard. My boots were clean. I had polished them the night before while Maya sat at the kitchen table doing her homework, asking me every few minutes how to spell something. Peculiar. She was writing a story about a peculiar dog. I told her PCULIR, and she said that was too many letters, and I said that most important things had more letters than you expected. The boots did not matter to Cassandra Voss. She came through the main lobby at 7:52 in the morning, for minutes before the tower officially opened, with two assistants moving in tight formation behind her and a phone pressed to one ear. She was the kind of woman who had learned to move through spaces as though they owed her something. Tailored charcoal suit, silver at her temples, that she wore like a credential. CEO of Voss Capital, a private equity firm that managed $11 billion in assets and occupied floors 14 through 19 of the Meridian Tower on Lakeshore Drive. I had been standing at the security desk, reading through the post log from the overnight shift. I looked up when the automatic doors opened. She did not look at me at all until she was 8 feet away. And then she did, and something in her expression closed the way a window closes when someone is tired of the draft. She stopped. Her eyes went to the badge on my chest, to my face, to my hands on the desk. She said to one of the assistants without looking away from me, "Did building management change the staffing?" The assistant said she would check. Cassandra looked at me directly for the first time. This isn't the main lobby entrance for building staff. The service corridor is on the east side. She said it the way you correct an error in a report. Evenly, without particular feeling, as though the error was self-evident and the only question was why it had not already been fixed. I had been hired 2 weeks before by Meridian Building Services. My assignment was the main lobby desk, 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., Monday through Friday. I had the paperwork in my bag. I did not take it out. "I'm the assigned lobby guard," I said. "Daniel Reeves. First day." She absorbed this without visible reaction. Lobby security has always been former law enforcement. Has that changed? This was addressed to the assistant again. I said, "I was military." She looked at me again, and this time there was something different in it. Not curiosity, more like a revised calculation. Military could mean many things, and the way she looked at my uniform and my age and my worn bag, she had evidently landed on the least impressive of them. "James will orient you to the protocols," she said, naming the senior guard who would come on at 8. Then she walked past the desk toward the elevator bank, and the two assistants followed, and I stood there in the lobby with the early morning light coming through the glass facade in long pale strips across the marble floor. I had a picture of Maya in my wallet. She was 6 in it, sitting on my shoulders at the lakefront, squinting into the sun, laughing at something I had said that I could no longer remember. I did not take it out either. I just went back to reading the log. My daughter's name was Maya Rose Reeves, and she was 8 years old, and she had her mother's eyes and my inability to back down from an argument once she believed she was right. She was right more often than I let on. She attended Lakeshore Elementary 3 blocks from our apartment, and every morning I walked her to the door, and every afternoon a neighbor named Gloria, who was 71 and had raised 4 kids of her own and had very specific opinions about how children should behave at the table, picked her up and stayed until I got home from my shift. Her mother had left when Maya was 2. Not violently, not in anger, just gradually, and then one day, completely. I did not explain this to Maya in any satisfying way because there was no satisfying explanation. When she asked where her mother was, I said she had gone to figure some things out, and Maya had thought about that for a while and then said that was a very long time to be figuring things out. I said she was right. Maya nodded and asked if we could have grilled cheese for dinner. We had grilled cheese. The apartment was small, 3 rooms on the 4th floor of a building on Maple Street, with a radiator that made a sound like a very old man climbing stairs and a kitchen window that looked out onto the fire escape, where I kept 2 pots of basil because Maya wanted a garden and we did not have a yard. She watered them every morning with a plastic cup. She talked to them. She said they grew better when you talked to them, and I said that was probably true, and she said probably wasn't good enough, and I said she was correct, and she looked satisfied. I had spent 11 years in the Army. Special Forces, the last 6 of those years. The specifics were the kind that live in paperwork with classification stamps, and in the kind of silence that settles into a person over time, not the heavy silence of damage, just the practiced quiet of someone who learned that most situations did not require narration. I had done 3 tours. I had come home after the 3rd one and found a daughter who barely knew my voice and a marriage that had been running on fumes for longer than either of us had admitted. I stayed for 2 years after that. When it ended, I was the one who stayed in the apartment because Maya liked her room and I was not going to ask her to move. I had a degree in civil engineering from a program I had completed during my 2nd and 3rd deployments through a distance learning arrangement that had taken 4 years instead of 2, and which I had never told anyone about because it had not seemed relevant to anything I was doing at the time. I got the security job because it had steady hours and the shifts aligned with Maya's school schedule, and because my body still knew how to stand in a room with full attention for long stretches without it costing me anything. I was good at reading spaces. I noticed things. It was not a remarkable skill. It was just practice, long and specific. James arrived at 8 o'clock and shook my hand and walked me through the protocols with the brisk efficiency of a man who had done this orientation many times. The camera system, the visitor log, the emergency line sequence, the particular preferences of the building's major tenants. He paused when he got to Voss Capital. Ms. Voss is the anchor tenant, he said. Floors 14 through 19, 5 floors. Her team takes up almost a quarter of the building. He looked at me steadily. She has preferences about the lobby. I said I had gathered that. James made a small sound that was not quite a laugh. She had the last 3 lobby guards reassigned. He let that sit. Not fired. Reassigned. She was particular about it. He went through the list. One had worn the wrong lanyard color, a discrepancy in the building's uniform standards that most tenants never noticed. One had admitted to a visitor that he was unsure about a parking validation policy. One had smiled at her on a morning when she had evidently not wanted to be smiled at. I listened to all of this without comment. At 8:47 that morning, a man in an expensive coat came through the lobby doors moving fast and heading straight for the elevator bank. He had no visitor badge, no check-in, and his name was not in the pre-authorized list I had memorized during the first hour of my shift. I stepped from behind the desk and put myself between him and the elevators and said, "Good morning," in the tone that closes a gap without starting a confrontation. He was annoyed. He said he was a guest of Cassandra Voss. I said I would be happy to confirm that and asked for his name. He gave it. I called up to the 14th floor and waited while the line rang twice, and an assistant answered and confirmed the appointment, and I stepped aside and thanked the man for his patience. He did not thank me back, but he did not complain either, which was something. At 11 o'clock, Cassandra Voss came back through the lobby heading out for what I assumed was lunch. She stopped at the desk. I had not expected her to stop. "James said you're former military," she said. "Yes." "Which branch?" "Army." She looked at me for a moment with the measuring quality she seemed to bring to most interactions. "My company manages portfolio holdings in the defense sector. I'm familiar with military structures." She said this as though it were relevant to my performance at the desk. "What was your MOS?" I knew what she was doing. MOS, military occupational specialty, was the kind of terminology that separated people who knew the military from people who had heard of it. She was checking whether I would understand the question, whether I belonged to the category she had already assigned me to, or to a slightly higher one. I told her I had been an engineer. She nodded once, in a way that suggested this confirmed something, and walked to the elevator. The doors closed. What I had told her was true. It simply was not complete. That evening, I walked Maya home from Gloria's apartment, 3 floors down from ours, and she talked the entire way up the stairs about a girl in her class named Petra, who had said that Maya's drawing of a horse looked like a dog, and Maya had said that it was actually a very fast horse, and Petra had said that didn't make it look less like a dog, and Maya had said that Petra was welcome to draw her own horse, and Petra had said she didn't want a Maya, had said that was fine then. I asked if she was upset about it. She thought about this seriously while we came through the apartment door. No, she said, because I know it's a horse. Petra just doesn't know horses. I took off my jacket and hung it on the hook by the door. That's a reasonable position. She dropped her backpack on the kitchen chair and opened the refrigerator with the authority of someone who had strong opinions about what was available for snack. Dad, she said, not looking at me, head in the refrigerator. Yeah, was work okay? I thought about the lobby, the marble floor and the long pale light in the morning. The man in the expensive coat, Cassandra Voss's measuring look. Yeah, I said. It was fine. She straightened up with an apple in her hand and looked at me with the particular attention she sometimes turned on me, the look her mother used to call the X-ray. Are the people nice? I found a cutting board and started on dinner. Some of them are getting there, I said. She accepted this and went to water the basil on the fire escape, talking to it in the low, serious murmur she used when she had important things to report. I started the stove and stood at the counter for a moment and looked at nothing in particular. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. The second week was quieter. I learned the building's rhythms, the way a lobby has a personality that changes by the hour. The early morning rush, precise and purposeful. The mid-morning lull when only the occasional courier broke the stillness. The lunch hour cascade of people in varying degrees of hurry. I learned which elevators ran slow. I learned that the northwest corner of the lobby had a blind spot in the camera coverage that the overnight crew used for phone calls. I learned that Cassandra Voss arrived at 7:52 every morning except Thursday, when she arrived at 8:15. I did not know why, and I did not ask. On the ninth day, she stopped at the desk again. It was 4:10 in the afternoon, past my shift, but James had called in sick, and I had agreed to cover until the evening guard arrived at 5. She was carrying a folder and looked like someone who had been in consecutive meetings since morning without adequate nutrition. She set the folder on the desk, which was not something tenants typically did. The visitor log, she said. Show me how you track pre-authorizations. I showed her. She looked at the system for a moment. You restructured the format. The pre-authorization log had been a running text list when I arrived. I had moved it to a grid organized by floor, time slot, and confirmation status, with a separate column for vehicle plates where relevant. It had taken me 40 minutes on the second morning. It was easier to cross-reference, I said. She looked at the grid for a moment longer. Then she picked up her folder and walked to the elevator without saying anything further. I stood at the desk and thought about Maya's horse, and the girl who didn't know horses, and said nothing to the empty lobby that deserved saying. The thing about being underestimated consistently is that it stops feeling like anything after a while. It becomes weather. You note it the way you note a cold morning, adjust accordingly, and move through the day. I had been noting it since I came back from my third tour and started applying for civilian positions. The interviews where the hiring manager's eyes went flat the moment I said I had been in the military, as though service was a kind of gap in a resume rather than a record of something. The engineering firms that said they would be in touch and never were. The contracting company that offered me a position doing site inspections at a salary that was roughly a third of what the role paid for someone who had come through a conventional engineering program. I had taken it because Maya needed new shoes and the radiator needed a part, and I was not in a position to negotiate on principle. I understood what I looked like. I had looked in the mirror, 41 years old, a face that had spent considerable time in places where the sun and the stress had done their work. Hands that were not the hands of someone who had spent 11 years behind a desk. I wore the uniform, and I stood at the desk, and I did my job with care, and most people who came through the lobby looked through me the way you look through glass, registering the transparency, not the thing itself. Cassandra Voss did not look through me exactly. She looked at me with active assessment, which was in some ways less comfortable. Being assessed, and found to be precisely what you appear to be, is its own quiet verdict. In the third week, her head of security came down to the lobby. His name was Brent. He had the build and the manner of a man who had spent a career being the largest person in most rooms and had come to regard this as a professional credential. He told me that Ms. Voss had requested a review of lobby security protocols in light of, he paused here, some recent irregularities. I asked what irregularities. He said there had been a visitor who arrived with authorization from a junior associate without executive sign-off. I remembered the visitor. I had confirmed the authorization through the exact protocol James had shown me. The authorization had been valid at every level the system required. Brent looked at me steadily. Ms. Voss prefers that visitors to floors 14 and above receive a secondary confirmation from her office directly. This was not in any protocol I had been given. I'll add it to the log, I said. He waited as though he expected something else from me. Some friction, some complaint. When none came, he looked mildly disappointed and went back to the elevators. James, when I told him, said that Brent had been running a quiet campaign to have lobby security folded under the Voss Capital internal team, which would effectively mean Brent's team rather than building management, which would mean Brent would have the authority to staff it as he saw fit. James had heard this from the building manager 3 months ago. So this is about the desk, I said. Everything in this building is about something else, James said. I thought about that for a while after he left. I thought about it while I updated the secondary confirmation protocol in the log and while I reorganized the visitor card system so that each Voss Capital floor had its own authorization queue. It took an hour. When I was done, the system was cleaner than it had been and Brent's stated concern was fully addressed, and I had not given anyone anything to use. Small decisions. That was mostly what the work was. Small decisions made correctly, consistently, without anyone noticing they had been made at all. Maya's school had a family event on a Thursday evening in late October. She had been talking about it for 2 weeks, specifically about the science demonstration she was presenting with a girl named Abike who was, according to Maya, the smartest person in the class. The demonstration involved something with baking soda and vinegar and a model of a volcano that Maya had spent 4 evenings constructing from papier-mâché on the kitchen table. I had cleared the shift 3 days in advance. Arranged for James to cover the last hour. Told Gloria I would be home by 8. Cassandra Voss called the lobby desk at 4:15 that afternoon. She did not call the lobby desk often. When she did, it was usually a question about a visitor or a courier, something that could have gone through her assistant but had reached me because of some gap in the chain. This time, she said there had been a security concern on the 14th floor. One of the server room doors had a keycard access error, and the override was producing an alert that her IT team could not clear. Building management's facilities line was not answering. Could lobby security send someone up? I said I would come up. The server room was at the east end of the 14th floor, a small windowless room behind a cipher door that was now cycling through an error state on the keypad panel. Cassandra was there with 2 members of her IT team, both of whom were looking at the panel with the expression of people who understood the theory but not this particular instance of the problem. I looked at the panel. The error code was one I recognized from the building systems documentation I had read during my first week on a lunch break because I read documentation the way some people read newspapers. The cipher door series installed in Meridian Tower had a firmware conflict when the building's backup power cycled, which it had done that morning during a brief grid fluctuation. The fix was a specific reset sequence that was not in the general troubleshooting guide, but was in the technical supplement that building management kept in a binder in the facility's office. I knew the sequence. I did not make a production of this. I entered the sequence. The panel cleared. The door unlocked. One of the IT team members said, "How did you know that?" I said I had read the building documentation. There was a pause in the room that had a particular quality to it. Cassandra was looking at me. Not the closed, assessing look from the lobby. Something more open or more unsettled, which was not exactly the same thing. "Thank you," she said. I told her I needed to get back to the desk and took the elevator down and checked my watch and had 14 minutes before my shift ended to get to Maya's school event. I made it with 11 minutes to spare. Maya was standing at her table with a bike and the volcano, wearing a paper badge that said scientist in her own handwriting. And when she saw me come through the gymnasium doors, she raised both hands above her head in a gesture of pure, uncomplicated triumph, as though my arrival were itself a victory she had been anticipating. The demonstration involved a great deal of orange foam. It was, by any scientific measure, success. On the way home, she held my hand and told me everything about it in the rapid, overlapping way she narrated things that mattered to her, circling back to add details she had initially skipped, and I listened to all of it with the full attention it deserved, which was complete. That night, after she was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold beside me and thought about the cipher panel and the IT team's faces and Cassandra Voss's expression in that server room. I thought about the binder in the facility's office and the 40-minute lunch break and the habit of reading documentation because information was available and ignoring available information had always seemed to me like a particular kind of waste. I thought about a briefing room in a compound outside Kandahar where I had stood in front of a map for 40 minutes explaining an infrastructure vulnerability in a route network to a group of officers who had the authority to act on the information and the particular exhaustion of watching people decide whether the source was credible before they decided whether the information was. I had been 29 years old. I had been right. The decision had taken 3 more days, and the situation had been considerably worse by the time action was taken. Some things do not change their shape when you change their context. The 4th week, Brent came back to the lobby. This time he brought a man named Pierce who he introduced as an external security consultant Voss Capital had retained to assess the building's security posture. Pierce was efficient and professional and asked me a set of questions that were structured to establish the limits of my awareness of the building's systems, physical and digital. I answered them honestly and completely and without elaborating beyond what was asked. By the end of the exchange, Pierce was writing in his notebook with a quality of attention that had not been there at the start of it. Brent did not look pleased. Pierce asked me, toward the end, what my assessment was of the lobby camera blind spot in the northwest corner. I said I had flagged it to building management in my first week and recommended a mirror installation to cover the angle without requiring additional camera hardware, and that the recommendation was in the maintenance request log with a response pending. Pierce wrote something down. He looked up. You submitted a formal recommendation? In writing, I said, with a diagram. Brent looked at the elevator bank. After they left, James appeared from wherever he had been strategically not present for the past 20 minutes. Pierce used to be with the Secret Service, he said. Brent brought him in expecting him to find gaps. Use them to make the case for restructuring. I said it sounded like the plan had not gone exactly as intended. James smiled for the first time in the 4 weeks I had known him. The diagram was a nice touch, he said. I had not drawn the diagram for Brent or for Pierce or for any purpose related to building politics. I had drawn it because there was a gap in the coverage, and a gap in coverage was a problem, and problems had solutions, and the solution should be documented clearly. That was all. But I understood that actions have context they did not intend, and that this was simply how things worked. On a Friday morning in November, Cassandra Voss stopped at the lobby desk again. It was 8:03. She had come in at her usual 7:52, and this was the first time she had stopped on the way in rather than the way out. She set a coffee on the counter. Not for me. She was carrying it for herself. She set it down because she was going to use both hands for what she said next. I've reviewed your personnel file, she said. Building management keeps basic records on all lobby staff as part of our tenancy agreement. I waited. Your previous employer listed you as an engineering consultant. She said this in the tone of someone correcting a data point. That's not a security background. I consulted for 3 years after my discharge, I said, before I took this position. What kind of engineering? Infrastructure assessment. Mostly federal contracts. She was quiet for a moment. The lobby had its early morning stillness, the light coming in flat and pale through the glass. Why are you here? She said. It was not an accusation. It was a question that had been sitting behind her other questions for a while and had finally come forward. I thought about Maya's school schedule, about Gloria on the 4th floor, about the radiator and the basil on the fire escape, and the way my daughter said peculiar with complete confidence in every one of its letters. The hour's work, I said. Cassandra picked up her coffee. She looked at me for a moment with an expression I had not seen from her before, not assessment, not dismissal, something that was still forming. She walked to the elevator. The doors opened, then closed. I went back to the log. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring more emotional stories like this one. What I did not know, standing at that desk on a Friday morning in November, was that in 72 hours the building I was guarding would become the center of something that had been building quietly in the systems around it for months. And that the man who had been moving through those systems, patient and deliberate, was someone I had been watching from the lobby for 4 weeks without yet understanding what I was looking at. His name was in the visitor log. He had come through 3 times, pre-authorized each visit by a junior member of Voss Capital's investment team, authorized for floors 16 and 17, the research division. He wore a visitor badge each time and signed out within the allotted window and did nothing that the camera coverage would flag. I had noticed him because I noticed everyone. The way he oriented himself when he came through the door, not toward the desk, but toward the elevator bank, not the instinctive movement of someone navigating an unfamiliar building, but the practiced movement of someone who already knew the layout. The way he held his phone against his chest when he signed the visitor log, face down, screen away from the desk camera. Small things. The kind of things that are not violations and are not evidence and are not anything you could put in a report. I had put them in a note in my own log. Just the dates, the times, the observations. The same way I had noted the camera blind spot. Because gaps are problems, and problems should be documented, and you do not always know which documentation will matter until it does. 72 hours. I walked home that evening in the November cold with my hands in my pockets and thought about the infrastructure assessment contracts I had run for 2 years after my discharge, the federal facilities, the classified data centers, the particular grammar of a building that is carrying a secret it does not know it is carrying. I thought about the man with the phone pressed face down against his chest. I thought about Cassandra Voss asking why I was here, and me giving her the answer that was true, but not complete. The complete answer was more complicated. The complete answer involved 11 years of learning to read spaces and systems and the small deviations that precede large failures, and a daughter on the 4th floor of a building on Maple Street who watered basil every morning and knew that the most important words had more letters than you expected, and the simple fact that when you have spent enough years doing work that matters at a level no one can see, you do not stop seeing things just because the room has changed. I stopped on the corner of Maple and 4th and looked up at the apartment window. The kitchen light was on. Gloria's silhouette moved past it. Maya was in there doing homework, probably asking Gloria how to spell something. I went up the stairs. It happened on a Monday. The man came through at 9:17. Same visitor badge process, same pre-authorization from the same junior associate on 17. I checked him in. I watched him go to the elevator. I watched him press 16 instead of 17, which was a small thing, a thing that could mean nothing, a thing that meant something. I called up to 17 and asked if the visitor was expected on 16 as well. The associate said no. I said thank you and hung up and called building security and got a voicemail and called Brent's direct line and got another voicemail and stood at the desk for 4 seconds making a decision. I told the afternoon coverage guard, a man named Otto who had arrived early for a shift overlap, to stay at the desk. Then I took the elevator to 16. The 16th floor held Voss Capital's research division, proprietary market analysis, portfolio modeling, the kind of data that did not belong to any public record and represented years of work and competitive advantage that could not be reconstructed if it was gone. I knew the layout because I had read the building's tenancy map during my second week. The man was in the corridor outside the research server room. He had a device in his hand that was not a phone. He was not supposed to be on this floor, and he was standing at a door he did not have authorization to open, and he had not heard the elevator. I said his name from the visitor log. He turned. What happened next took 11 seconds. I know because I have counted it since. He made a decision and moved, and I had made my decision 4 seconds earlier at the lobby desk, and the gap between those 2 decisions was the whole of it. He was on the floor, and the device was in my hand, and I was on my radio calling building security with the calm, flat voice of someone reporting a maintenance issue, because panic in a corridor does not help anyone. Brent arrived in 4 minutes. Pierce, who happened to be in the building for a follow-up consultation, arrived in 5. 2 police officers arrived in 9. I gave them the device. I gave him my log notes, the 3 prior visits, the dates, the times, the face-down phone observations. I gave them the call record showing I had attempted to reach building security before going up myself. Pierce looked at the log notes for a long time without speaking. Then he looked at me with an expression that Pierce, who had spent 20 years in professional security, probably did not use often. He said, "You documented this before you knew what it was." I said that was generally the right time to document things. Cassandra Voss arrived on 16 at 10:04. Someone from her executive team had reached her mid-meeting. She came out of the elevator and took in the scene the officers Brent, Pierce, the man seated against the wall with his hands bound, and me standing at the edge of it holding my radio. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she walked past everyone else and stopped in front of me and said, "Are you all right? Now what did you find? Now what does this mean for our data? Are you all right?" I said I was fine. She looked at the device in the evidence bag an officer was holding. "What is that?" Pierce answered before I could. He said it was a data extraction tool, high grade, the kind used in corporate espionage at a level that was not amateur. He said the visitor had been engaged in a patient, multi-visit reconnaissance before attempting the extraction. He said that the attempt had been stopped before any data was accessed. He said this was due to observations logged by lobby security over the prior 4 weeks that had identified behavioral anomalies missed by every other layer of the building security system. Brent said nothing. Cassandra listened to all of this. Then she turned back to me. "You flagged him 3 weeks ago." "I logged observations," I said. "I didn't have anything actionable. Just patterns." "You knew." I thought it was worth writing down. She was quiet for a moment. Around us, the corridor had the busy, concentrated activity of a situation being processed by people with specific jobs to do. Pierce was on his phone. Officers were taking statements. The man against the wall was looking at the floor. Cassandra said, "Pierce told me about your background. After the consultation last week, he looked into you." I waited. Federal infrastructure contracts. Before that, 6 years special forces. Before that, a degree in civil engineering you completed during active deployment. She said each item, the way you read items from a list, you're only now understanding the full weight of. You designed security assessment protocols that are still in use in 3 federal facilities. I did not confirm or deny this. The protocols were not classified, but the facilities were, and I had learned to be careful about the distinction. "Why didn't you tell me?" she said. The corridor was loud with other people's necessary business. I thought about the side entrance on my first day, the closed expression at the lobby desk, the question directed at the assistant, "Did building management change the staffing?" "You didn't ask," I said. "You already knew what I was." She absorbed this without deflecting it. She did not offer a counter-argument or a qualification. She stood in the corridor and let it land, and I respected her for that more than I would have respected a defense. "I'd like to offer you a position," she said. "Head of security for Voss Capital. The role has been vacant for 4 months because I couldn't find anyone whose judgment I trusted." I thought about Maya, about the school 3 blocks from the apartment, and Gloria on the 4th floor, and the Basil on the fire escape. "I'll need the hours to work," I said. "Tell me what you need." That evening, I walked home through the November cold and up the 4 flights and through the door, and Maya was at the kitchen table with her homework, and she looked up and said, "Dad, how do you spell reconnaissance?" I stopped in the doorway. "RECNC," I said. She counted the letters on her fingers with a look of profound suspicion. "That's too many letters. Most important things have more letters than you expect," I said. She wrote it down with the careful, deliberate hand of someone who intended to get it right. Then she looked up at me. The kitchen light was warm, and the radiator was making its old man on stairs sound, and outside on the fire escape the Basil was doing whatever Basil does in November, persisting quietly, the way small things do when someone remembers to look after them. "Was work okay today?" she asked. I hung up my jacket on the hook by the door. "Yeah," I said. "It was a good day." She nodded like she had expected nothing less, and went back to her homework, and I went to make dinner, and outside the window the city carried on in its ordinary way, indifferent and complete, the way cities always are, whether or not anyone in them has finally been seen. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.